You know, this might be the most excited I've ever been for a reading wrap-up. Hello everyone and welcome back. Here's everything that I read in August. Reading wrap-ups are always some of my favorite videos to film, but this month in particular, it's very special because I recommend every single book that I read this month. Not one book in today's video was under 3.5 stars for me, so that is practically unheard of. As always, I'm going to give you a brief summary of the book, my rating for the book, and then my thoughts and general ideas about the book. This month I read 9 books and every single one of these books was a fantasy book. Obviously we have a mix of different sorts of fantasies. We've got some romantasy, we've got some cozy fantasy rom-coms, and we have some epic fantasy. So something for everyone, but it was a very fantasy packed month because August was the last month of winter. I really wanted to jam pack my fantasy agenda into that final month. So let's get started. The first book that I read this month was Silvercloak by L.K. Stephen, and this book takes place in a world where magic is fueled by either pleasure or pain, and they have magical wands and stuff, where an undercover detective is deployed to infiltrate a dark magical mafia society, the same society who killed her parents when she was a child. I gave this book 4.25 stars. I think that's the best summary I could have given you of this book. It very much feels like the auras of Harry Potter, if you know what I mean. Our main character, Saffron, she sees her parents murdered before her eyes when she's a child by this evil gang, and then she grows up, becomes a detective, goes through the Silvercloak Academy, and on her final exam day, she is deployed to become an undercover spy, work her way into the Blood Moon mafia or gang or whatever, and take it down from the inside. But as always, she finds that there is a rather sinister secret that underpins her society as well. I thought this was wonderful. It was perfectly paced, very, very gripping. Like at no point of this story was I bored. And the magic system in and of itself, like the pain, the pleasure, the wands, all of that really just felt like a breath of fresh air. And I feel like being a breath of fresh air is rather hard in the fantasy or romantasy genre, given that everything sometimes seems a little bit copy-paste or borrowed. The magic was great, the writing, the pacing, I loved all of that. I also really enjoyed our characters and the romance subplot. There were times of this story where sometimes things happened a little too quickly or a little too easily, and I'm not really going to dock points for that because that really helped with the pacing, but that was the only real issue with this book. Other than that, this was wonderful. The next book I read was sent to me by the lovely people at Penguin, and it was Accomplice to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mehra. This is the third book in the Assistant to the Villain series. It is a cozy fantasy rom-com following Evie, who is the assistant to the kingdom's most notorious villain, aptly named the Villain. And it basically, I can't really give you much of a summary of this book because it very much would spoil books 1 and 2 for you. Our main cast are on a quest, and this quest is to kind of address a prophecy that was brought up in the books before this one. We are following multiple POVs here. The plot is moving a little more. The romance in this is definitely moving. It's a slow burn. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. I really did enjoy it. Just like the other books before it, it's hilarious, cozy, campy, slapstick comedy. I think the main thing driving this story was the romance, which is not so much the case in the other books because, like I said, it is quite a bit of a slow burn, but I really loved that the romance was such a big factor of this book. I do think, however, there were quite a few issues with regards to the pacing of this book, and also the fact that we were following so many different plot lines sometimes got confusing, or some plot lines got a little bit dull with the other characters, but overall it was a good time. I never know how to give an adequate review of any book in this series, but I read A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin, and this is of course the third book in A Song of Ice and Fire, except mine is split into 2 copies because it is that big. Once again, with regards to the summary, what can I really tell you? The 7 Kingdoms, or Westeros, it's completely thrown into turmoil. There is chaos. The leadership has crumbled. We have a new unstable king on the throne. This book follows multiple different characters, multiple different plot lines and perspectives, but I'd say that the key players in any of this series is going to be the Stark family. And there are several members of the Stark family that we are following in this story. and all of them have a very important role to play. This is a wonderful epic fantasy series, and I've been meaning to read it for the longest time, so I'm very glad that I got through this book. I ended up giving this book 4 stars, and I would say it is one of the strongest books in the series thus far. And I don't know how George R.R. Martin just manages in every single book to toss the Seven Kingdoms back into political turmoil, but he manages it once again. This is the book in which the Red Wedding occurs and where Olenna's scheming occurs. If you know, you know. Those words might not mean anything to you, but like, things happen in this book. This is the first half of it. Not a lot happened here. I thought it was going to be a 3-star read, but the second half really redeemed it for me. There was just so much action packed into this half of the story. I couldn't put it down. It was absolutely riveting. I really did enjoy this, and I'm very glad to, you know, be making my way through A Song of Ice and Fire. I have been meaning to do it for the longest time because, like I say constantly, Game of Thrones is one of my favorite shows of all time. So the fact that I haven't read all of the books yet is criminal. The next book I actually read with you on camera, and this was just such a good time. It was Paladin's Grace by T. Kingfisher, and in this book we are following Stephen, who is a paladin, so a knight who serves under the Saint of Steel. So in this world there are different temples or deities and groups of people who serve under them. Stephen's saint is the Saint of Steel, who dies very early on in the book. That's literally the prologue. The Saint of Steel dies, and Stephen and his fellow paladins are very, very depressed because of it. They have no sense of purpose, they have no sense of joy anymore, and Stephen, he is really going through it until he runs into an awkward perfumer in an alleyway, and this girl Grace makes him laugh for the first time in a really long time. They're running around the streets of this medieval kingdom, and later there is a plotline that comes in. It's a criminal trial where Grace is being tried for murders that are randomly occurring. So she and Stephen need to firstly exonerate her, but also kind of investigate what's going on while they dance around each other, because they have an undeniable attraction towards each other, but both of them are too awkward to actually act on it, so it's very entertaining. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. This was a hilarious, cozy fantasy rom-com in this medieval kingdom with awkward adults. Like, these are people in their mid-30s, and I really enjoy just reading about people like that, because too many times in the romantasy genre we have these young, hot, sexy, smooth-talking, bantering kind of people, you know, like with Fourth Wing or ACOTAR, you have these like suave, very flirtatious people. That is not the case in this book. Middle-aged, awkward, they've got back pain. Yeah, I had a really good time with this book. I'm very glad I read it. I have not read the other 3 books in this series, and I haven't read anything else by T. Kingfisher, but this definitely put her on my radar because I had a good time. The next book I read was also quite cozy, but it was very, very different, and that was Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This was a reread for me. I read this earlier in the year, DNF'd it, but I decided to come back to it because it's winter time now and it would be perfect, and boy am I glad that I did. This book follows Fitzchivalry Farseer, who is the bastard child of a prince of this specific realm. This story is essentially a long character study of Fitz recounting his childhood. So when he was found to be a bastard and brought to the keep, he used to sleep in like the stables with the stable master as his father figure, where he eventually got very close to a couple of animals. He discovered he has a power called the wit, which is often looked down upon, but it allows him to share his mind with animals and forge a really strong bond, but it's a taboo kind of magic. He later on starts his training as the apprentice to the royal assassin, and that sort of training takes up quite a big chunk of this book as he learns the trade of, well, killing people. He also later begins to train in something that people of royal blood possess. It's called the skill, and it's another mentalist ability, except it's person to person rather than person to animal, and he begins his training in that. So that's like the majority of this book. It's a slow, long character study with this guy telling us about how his childhood worked. I initially gave this book 3.75 stars, but thinking about it, I think I want to bump it up to 4 stars just because of how wonderfully it's written and how genuinely close you get to this character. You really feel like you understand him by the end of this book. Yes, the pacing's slow, but I think the writing and the connection to the character more than enough makes up for it. This sets up the foundation of the world, of future plot lines, and of this character just so beautifully. With that being said, if you are looking for a gripping plot line, fast-paced action sequences, this is not the book for you. Such a unique sort of story, and I'm very glad I gave it a second shot. I'm gonna have a little change of lighting because I legitimately cannot see out of that window. It's so bright. Oh my god, winter is truly over and I couldn't be happier about it. The next book I read was due to some incessant needling by a good friend of mine. She was obsessed with these books. She sat down with me and talked about them for an hour with me, so I decided to finally indulge her and pick it up, and it was The Hurricane Wars by Thea Guanzon. This takes place in a war-torn land of magic, ether, and dragons, where the sinister Night Empire is attempting to conquer the land. The Night Empire is made up of people called Shadowforged who use dark shadow magic, and they're attempting to take over the entire land, and the hope of the world rests on a young girl called Taliesin, who is the sole remaining light weaver, so the user of light magic. The book starts off with the Night Empire conquering a land called Sardovia, where Taliesin is living, and they take that land over. Taliesin retreats to the Dominion Islands, which is a set of independent islands which she is actually the secret princess of. And the Dominion Islands wants to maintain their independence and their peace, while also giving the Night Empire something to kind of incentivize them to leave them alone. So there is a political alliance formed between the princess, Taliesin, of the Dominion Islands and the heir to the ruthless Night Empire, and that is, of course, a marriage. Oh, I had so much fun with this. This was 4 stars. Now, I'm not gonna lie, in the beginning of this book, I was a little bit worried because it just seemed like things were being thrown at us. It was just a lot of info dumping, a lot of time skipping. It made absolutely no sense what I was reading, and I really thought up until like the 20% mark, I was like, this is gonna be like 3 stars maximum. But then when we skipped forward to the 4 months after Sardovia was conquered, and when Taliesin was in the Dominion Islands about to get married to her mortal enemy, God, everything from that point onwards was just absolutely excellent. This is a slow burn, and I mean a true slow burn romantasy. A slow burn romantasy about 2 mortal enemies set against the backdrop of this magical war. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but this is inspired by Reylo. That's not a ship that I actually care for in real life, but when it is put into a book, I find that it makes for the most delicious enemies to lovers storylines ever, and that is exactly what you get in this book. The world is also inspired quite a lot by Filipino folklore and mythology, and it really shows. It's absolutely wonderfully constructed, like the way that the world looks. Wonderful characters, wonderful plotline. I had such a good time with this book. And of course, the book that I read directly after that was A Monsoon Rising, which is the 2nd book in this series. This is basically just a continuation of what happened in the 1st book. The storyline continues, the plot is supposed to thicken, the stakes are meant to become higher, but I confess I'm a little disappointed with this book. I only ended up giving it 3.5, which is still good, but the reason it got 3.5 is because the romance was delicious. I love the romance in this book, love the romance plotline. It was the only thing driving the plot. In fact, it was the only piece of plot because nothing else was happening. You know, we're told this is a high stakes world, it's dangerous. There was no plot to this book. It was just pure romance. And as enjoyable as it was, I don't think it had enough substance for me to give it anything higher than 3.5 stars. You guys definitely won't be shocked by the next book I read, which was A Feast for Crows by George R.R. Martin, and this is the 4th book of A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, this follows on from the rest of the books in the series in that the kingdom is in chaos, of course. However, this book is a little bit different in that everything that's happening is just confined to Westeros below the wall. So we don't really get much of Jon Snow, we don't really get much of Daenerys Targaryen, which is crazy because in my mind they're the main characters, but we do get a lot of the Lannisters and a lot of the Starks, as well as the Greyjoys. This was a great book. I gave it 4 stars. I especially enjoy a very specific plotline from this book and from its season in the TV show, which is when Arya joins the Faceless Men. This was just, I was looking forward to this the entire time. So yeah, I'm very happy with this book. I thought it was a wild ride, and much like all of George R.R. Martin's books, it's very readable. Even though you're following so many different characters, plotlines, whatnot, is very digestible, and I'm very grateful for that. I've also really been enjoying learning more about the Greyjoy family because they are not like a big super important point in this show, but they are very significant in this book in particular. And that means now that I've finished this, I only have one book in A Song of Ice and Fire left, and it's A Dance with Dragons. So I'm hoping to get around to that in September. Oh, that light. Oh my god. And the final book that I read this month was Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. This book follows on from the first book, Assassin's Apprentice, and the book can be broken up into, I think, like around 4 distinct parts. The first part is Fitz healing from something that happened to him and almost took his life in the first book. The second part is when he comes across a wolf cub that is being abused and takes it in. The next part is him reconnecting with Molly, one of his friends from when he was a child, except their relationship is developing to a whole nother level. And the final part is there is chaos in the kingdom from both internal threats and external threats, and Fitz must do his job as the royal assassin, as the bastard. He is doing his best to save his kingdom and stand by his king, and I am going to put those blinds down right now. Oh, that's so much better. Anyway, it was 4.5 stars. I have very much the same sorts of feelings towards this book as I did the previous book, except I feel like this book takes everything that made Assassin's Apprentice great and just dials it up to 9. It was slow paced, it was character driven, but I think there is so much more of a solid plot here in terms of court politics, betrayal. There are enemies everywhere, both inside and outside. It was just so entertaining, and I still wouldn't say it's an action-packed page turner, but it was so cool plot-wise as well. It's like you can see everything that's happening, and I love the trajectory that this story is taking, and I cannot wait for the third and final book, and I will be doing that in in September or October. There are, as always, a bunch of books that I am anticipating for September, as well as a bunch of events. I have some very exciting bookish events that I can't talk about that are coming up, but they are coming up, and I would recommend that you go follow me on TikTok if you haven't already, because I'm going to be posting all of this on BookTok and Bookstagram, but I cannot bring a camera into some of these events, so I will not be talking about them on here, but I'm very excited nonetheless. Now, as for my TBR, in the month of September, the first one I'm reading, I should already be finished reading by the time you guys watch this, and that is The Isle in the Silver Sea by Tasha Suri, and it's one of the many Lady Night books that are releasing this year. And I believe there is a legend of a witch and a knight who have to like fall for each other. Like there is a prophecy that they're going to fall in love with each other and doom each other in every lifetime. The next one we have is Wildcard, which is the 4th book in the Rosehill series. This is by Elsie Silver, her small town romance series. And then we have The Second Death of Locke by V.L. Bobolino. This book sounds so good, and I've heard nothing but good things about it from people who've read the arc, and it's about a lady knight and her mage. Her mage is her childhood friend, so another Lady Knight book. And they go on a quest to protect a child. The final book though is It's Been a Long Time Coming, and it's Alchemized by Sen Lin Yu, which is of course a reworking of Manacled, which is a popular Dramini fanfiction. I'm simultaneously excited and terrified for that book. I can't wait to have my hands on Alchemized. That is all I'm looking forward to in September, and that is the end of my August reading wrap up. The lighting is crazy today, but that just means it's getting warm and sunny, so I'm not going to complain too much. That is all from me today, and I will see you next time. Bye!